Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you all for making time this afternoon to join the Soy Aquaculture Alliance and these talented panelists that we have with us for our webinar. It's loosely titled Opportunities and Challenges for Aquaculture in 2023, and I know that's a broad and in some cases complex topic, but we'll try to bring that home. If I can get control of my screen here, perfect. But again, just wanted to welcome all of you. My name is Easton Kabochik. I serve as the Executive Director of the Soy Aquaculture Alliance and have so for a year and 12 days. So we're finally getting our legs underneath us, and we're seeing a lot of growth and engagement with not only the soybean industry, but also with the aquaculture industry. And this webinar is actually a record for us. So we continue to see more and more engagement in these kinds of communications and outreach. So if you have ideas or feedback, good, bad, or otherwise, certainly always welcome to that. Or if you have ideas for other topics that would add value, please don't be a stranger. But just to get a sense of who's joining us among that this audience of just over 150, we have a number of soybean staff, farmers, QSSBs. There's academic. Welcome all of our research friends. Of course, a lot of friends in the aquaculture industry on the aquafeed side, on technology side, and then feed companies, and of course, media. So welcome all. Appreciate you again making time. To recap our agenda here, we're going to do a few housekeeping, which I'll get to in a moment. Some thank yous, introduce our panelists, and then go through those challenges and opportunities from a few different leading perspectives. SAA's perspective, I'm certainly not an expert like those that are on this panel, but that's why we have them here. We have the National Aquaculture Association, which represents, as Paul will share more, represents the actual aquaculture farmers in the United States. We have Stronger America Through Seafood, and then the American Soybean Association. We'll also have a Q&A. So at the end, it doesn't have to be at the end. There's a Q&A function, should be at the bottom of your screen there. Please submit questions throughout, and we'll aggregate those and consolidate those to answer them at the end. But please don't be a stranger. Just so you know, you're all muted, so we can't hear you. I sometimes wish that we could, but it helps us stay on time, on task, and be productive. And then for anyone interested in this webinar afterwards, it'll be available on the Soy Aquaculture Alliance website and LinkedIn. We're also trying something new. So we're trying to encourage engagement, and we want your questions. We want you to pick on Paul and Virginia and Drew. So please don't be shy. We will be randomly selecting a winner at the end of this to get a Soy Aquaculture Alliance hat and the famous socks, which I can't believe how many folks ask for those or ask for multiple pair of those. I think Paul wears them every day. So yep, exactly. So please do share your questions. We'll pick someone at the end. I'd be remiss, and we wouldn't be here without our members and our supporters. So for those of you unfamiliar, the way that our organization and our research is funded is through soybean farmers. So these are the farmers from these states that make this webinar possible, that which I'll show you in a moment, make our research possible, and really are a partner to the aquaculture industry in driving value both for domestic aquaculture farmers and soybean farmers, and from my personal perspective, right, the consumers of seafood, right? So we have a ton of opportunity and partnership here, and also a huge thank you. We wouldn't be here without the national soybean organizations, including USEC, the United Soybean Board, American Soybean Association, and WISH. So there's a lot to this complex soy family, as we like to call it. But really, our goal is to continue adding value to soybean farmers and through mutual benefit, and including aquaculture. So this is a really a global effort, right? Aquaculture doesn't really have borders. SAA's focus is really here in the United States, but we're a very collaborative group. So really quickly for introductions, we have Paul. I'm going to get this wrong. No one can pronounce my name either. So I'm going to say Zajichek. That's Irish, right? Perfect. We have Drew Winters with Stronger America Through Seafood, Virginia Houston at the American Soybean Association, then myself. So I'll let them introduce themselves more in depth later, but really a talented panelist. Like I said, my expertise is limited, and I'm hopefully humble enough to admit that. And so that's where we draw on the real experts here. And if you can't tell, part of the focus of this is really in the policy and regulatory side. So these are the movers and shakers on that end. And SAA is trying to support that as much as possible through our research, through our engagement, through farmer support. Before we get into that, I wanted to offer just a few updates on SAA, and I'll breeze through these because there's more to come in emails, in a little bit. For those of you new to SAA and our mission, really it's simply to expand domestic aquaculture and the value of U.S. soy and aquafeed. So soy is a sustainable quality ingredient, primary ingredient for aquafeed, between 25 and pushing 45, 50%, depending on the species. We invest in these strategic program areas to make that happen. So the bulk of our budget and focus is in research, and that research goes to farmers, to aquafeed producers, and it really helps improve the inclusion of soy around the world, right? So even if it's the research is done here, it's going to local aquafeed manufacturers that are shipping feed around the world, or it's going abroad and helping expand those markets, which again, you'll see here in just a moment. We are stepping up our game too in just overall aquaculture industry relations, and I would qualify this too as common issues management. So that primary issue being the certification of U.S. soy, and that's where, if going back a couple of slides, are working very closely with the national soybean organizations, specifically USEC, to make sure that aquafeed producers and farmers have a freedom to operate and are able to use U.S. soy as a sustainable plant ingredient. We're also working, of course, with our farmers and soybean stakeholders to make sure they understand the opportunity in soy. If you don't have that by the end of understand the opportunity in aquaculture by the end of this webinar, I'll have to give you a call. And I've certainly failed, but I know there's plenty of opportunity there. We're doing market analysis and a little bit of advocacy as well, though it's not a core focus. That's in the good hands of those are my fellow panelists. I did want to share, we have a quarterly update on all of our research projects. So we have 13 projects happening right now and just approved 5 that will be beginning here shortly. You can see, an overall status, and this is really intended to be a quick look at our quarterly report. So look for an email tomorrow if you're on our newsletter for an update on all of the research projects. I believe it's 7 different species, 13 different projects, and then a couple of education and social license research projects as well. So a lot of investment, a lot of good things happening to help empower this industry, empower the aquaculture farmers. I want to help you stay engaged and understand what we're working on. A few other updates, as I mentioned, the certification of U.S. soy remains an important focus. That is largely in the hands of USEC, but I'm hearing I remain the number one phone call sometimes seems like for aquafeed manufacturers and producers, and we just really understand that's a key issue, and we're working on long-term solutions for that important issue. Coming up, we're going to be, actually the entire board will be attending the 39th meeting of Fish Feed and Nutrition Workshop. I believe that's in Maine this year, which has been a great networking opportunity for aquafeed nutritionists. So if you're there, say hi. I also really wanted to tout the fish feed newsletters. So that's been getting 50, I think, on 18% open rates, 50% open rates, and just really well read. So I appreciate all of those who are actually taking time to read through that, to follow up, and I've been very generous in giving feedback and ideas for content there. So if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, let's reach out and get you on that list. And then stay tuned. If you like this webinar, we're going to be talking more in depth on research on June 28th. Okay, a few updates on my side done. Got the business. Now we'll get to the meat of our the fish meat of our presentation here. So setting the stage. I'll try not to do too many dad puns here, but just I found I couldn't think of a better way to set the stage than the USAC annual report, which just really stood out to me. In this is World Aquaculture Production forecast for through 2035, and a few. I think we all have first of all, we all get the charts that say that demonstrate how much aquaculture is going to grow, and we've all seen the statistics on how the United States imports almost 90% of its seafood, between 85 and 90% of its seafood. That is a trend that isn't slowing down, and this chart showed that very well, I thought. And so, thank you, USEC, for the good content. But I want to point out, by 2035, they're projecting a 36% increase in aquaculture production, and 59% of the fish that is consumed by humans being produced by aquaculture. So that's an amazing opportunity. That's amazing growth, right? And if you look at where that's happening, it's primarily in Southeast Asia and China, who are already leaders in aquaculture, as you can see by the yellow bar. And then you come down here and we look at the Americas, and we look at major soy producers, and this is where we are. So my intent in showing this is just really twofold. One, it's that aquaculture is projected to grow exponentially. That means the entire pie is getting bigger. So when we talk about SAA's mission to expand domestic aquaculture, it's not a competitive intent, right? We have a very balanced relationship with our partners abroad. It's that the entire pie is getting bigger, and we certainly have an opportunity to embrace that. But we have a few challenges, and that's what we're talking about today. So I could probably fill 10 pages of this, right? But we have challenges in overall profitability, which farmer doesn't have a challenge there. We have challenges with technology, social license, you name it. There's a lot of barriers, really, is the theme of this, to preventing aquaculture farmers in the United States from taking off, from being, from having the opportunity to produce local, fresh, sustainable seafood, because they're competing with those powerhouses abroad. And again, it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just that there's plenty of opportunity here that we're unable to embrace because of some of these barriers. And so I'm going to let Paul talk a little bit more about what the farmers are saying themselves, as far as what they see and why they're not able to expand, or in some cases, production is actually declining because of a number of these issues. So that's really, my high level way to set the stage today. And Paul, get ready. I'll pass it over to you in just a moment here, but really wanted to just discuss the whys, right? Why isn't U.S. aquaculture growing as much as the rest of the world, and isn't projected to grow as much as the rest of the world? What are those challenges? And how can we make some incremental improvements, right? What are the low hanging fruit, 1, 2, 3 policies, opportunities that we can collaborate on between the soybean industry and the aquaculture industry to help make that improvement and have some mutual benefit there. So I hope I set that stage well enough. I'm going to turn it over to Paul. Paul, if you could introduce yourself and jump in your presentation. I'll be your slide changer, so just let me know when you need to move that forward.
All right. Well, thank you, Easton. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the soy farmers and the associations that have put this opportunity together. Really, really appreciated it. For the Soy Aquaculture Alliance board, annually, my board, the NAA board, meets. We usually get together for a lunch, and I always have to smile. I think Easton does too. These are farmers meeting farmers. So much of our challenges are the same. You may be on land and planting seeds. We're in water planting fish, very much alike. So I'm not great at predicting the future. I'll just tell you that. But we'll talk about some of the stuff that's right in front of us and what we're working on. If you're not familiar, the National Aquaculture Association was an idea of farmers in 1989 at one of the big conferences, and their focus was creating a voice for U.S. aquaculture at the federal level, on Congress, on the agencies for programs, policies, regulations, legislation. And they pursued that idea. They became incorporated in 1991. And today I have a 23-member board of directors that's fully representative of the great diversity of U.S. aquaculture in the United States. I have members in Maine or board members in Maine, Florida, Colorado, Mississippi, Arkansas, Washington, California, just about anywhere where there's any amount of aquaculture produced, there's a board member that represents that area, represents that sector. And then all the work of the association is through subject matter expert committees. There's 13 of them. They're made up of farmers, members of the association, some veterinarians, some people from the supplier side that really work on this stuff. And I'm just connecting the dots. I just try to keep the wheels on the wagon and focused, meet our deadlines. And it's quite an honor to be here. I thought, to sort of set the stage, a lot of people don't slice the census of aquaculture data different ways, but I thought we'd do a slice of the 2018 census, maybe offset some of the gloomy news that Easton talked to in a bit. So this is our farm tour. Let's jump to the next slide. These are all numbers from the 2018 census of aquaculture. So in overall, USDA says there's almost 3,000 farms in the United States that are selling aquatic animals. And that's could be anything: bait, food, recreational, ornamental, you name it. And when I looked at that, I just looked at those farms that would use compounded feeds. Where would soy appear in a feed and that would be fed? So if we slice through that 3,000, then we're to about 2,300 farms that feed a compounded feed. And those farms use different kind of production systems. And so there's some numbers there. You can read them. I'm not going to jump all into those. But I think what's important is, first of all, farmers are not participating in the census like they used to. So these are underreported numbers. And in fact, we got an update from NASS, the National Ag Statistics Service, the other day, that they're way behind and farmers reporting to the Census of Agriculture right now. And they want us to encourage our members to participate in the census. So if you haven't done your census, you better, because I'm going to beat up on that already. The other part of this is there are numbers of tanks and raceways and pond acreage and all this stuff. The productivity per unit of water continually increases. And it's an amazing increase. When I started in aquaculture in 1987, I did some analysis for Florida, and in 10 years, they had doubled their productivity per unit of water. And I'm sure that that's increasing here for the United States, especially with the adoption of some of the technology in fish production, where maybe we were at 5,000 or 6,000 pounds per acre, and now we're at that 10,000 to 12,000 pounds per acre. So this makes a big, huge difference for you guys that are producing soy. It's not so much that we're static. We are really growing, and there's this underreporting issue that's really a problem. I've got an example down there where ornamental fish are down in the census for about $43 million. They did their own internal analysis about a year ago, and they're actually at about $172 million in farm gate sales. And I'm not saying that every sector of U.S. aquaculture that feeds is that they're that much underreported, but I am saying we have a significant underreporting of production in the United States. And I'm not sure how to fix that. The farmers look at that census and they're concerned that it informs their domestic and foreign competitors where they've developed markets and what kind of prices, what kind of production that they have. And we think, our members think and have said so, that they're reporting less and less to this public reporting because it informs that competition. So what are some of the issues we're working on and we'll continue to work on? If you weren't familiar, there is no aquatic livestock insurance in the United States. And so for high risk natural events, disease, or production failures, there is no backstop. The farms absorb that loss. However, in 2021, there was a big winter storm that killed 10 million pounds of farmed redfish. It was in 8 farms in Texas. So it kind of gives you an idea of the concentrated production that can occur in the U.S. that flies pretty much under the radar screen. The program that Farm Service Agency has, this emergency assistance for livestock, honeybees, and farm-raised fish, was really only at that point allowed for game fish and bait fish. And through a huge concerted advocacy effort, which the American Soybean Association, American Farm Bureau, Texas Aquaculture, Catfish Farmers of America, the NAA, all worked to try to convince the agency to kick that program open, and they did. So now we have at least a backstop for catastrophic natural events. And to show you how this has really kicked into gear and made a big difference, in 2020, those payments under that program were about $282,000 for aquaculture. And in 2021, they had jumped to $101 million. And so between May and the end of the reporting, which was January of 2022, this is where the farmers finally have some risk management where we've never had any before. And we're continually working to improve the agency's understanding of aquaculture. I'll be in DC Monday talking to Farm Service Agency about that. Next slide, please. So this is an odd topic, and you'd say, what? Aquatic animal health? Well, so aquaculture is not that old in the United States. Production really started to kick in after World War II with returning veterans, and people that had been working with state and federal agencies said, hey, I'm growing fish here, working for a public agency. I think I can grow fish at home and make a living at it. And so they started to. But what's happened is in the US, relative to aquaculture especially, it's a very siloed regulatory system. We don't have that long history of agriculture and one big lead agency like USDA, or in each state, a state Department of Agriculture. It's been siloed between land, agencies that regulate land, water, species, and in this case, health. And so we have a very fractured system in the US where some agriculture agencies do the animal industry part of their agency, but most of the time it's in natural resource or fish and game agencies. And there's a real big difference in outlook. The ag people are very risk-based. What is the issue? How big is that risk? Should be that concerned, and what can we do to mitigate that risk without stopping the production of food and fiber? Versus natural resource folks that can be very highly risk averse. They see a risk and they say, oh, we need to stop that. So what happens? This results in confusion and cost, and how we're working to try to change that is advocated for a national aquaculture health plan and standards. And within that, a comprehensive aquaculture health program standards program at the farm level management. And so how does this make a difference? Well, not every farm is a closed system. They have to buy their seed or their fry or their fingerlings from other farmers. And so there's this interstate trade, in some cases an international trade, to get those starter fish to grow. And that's where this comes in. Those state regulations can add significant regulatory burden and cost to move between the states or to come into the country. Next slide, Easton, thank you. So feed, this is our favorite topic, right? For farmers, 50 to 60% of a farm's variable costs are in feed. And as you know, we all hear this, the drumbeat of sustainability in the United States is huge. What are the sources? Are they sustainable? What are the ingredients? Are they sustainable? And you guys, you soy farmers, have a wonderful story to tell, and we are so happy to be partnered with you. There's this drive to reduce the amount of fish meal and fish oil in there and increase the protein content, but that are from a sustainable source. And as we expand the candidate species that are grown on farms, each of these fish have a different diet. You don't feed a catfish diet to a rainbow trout. And this is increasingly a challenge. And then how do those species, those fish, respond to plant-based ingredients? This is something you've been working on, you've been invested in, you've seen great strides and improvement, and we really, really appreciate that. And what we're seeing is an ever-improving feed conversion ratio, pounds of feed to pounds of fish. And so thank you for that work and your investment. It's really wonderful. And we hope you don't stop. So regulations is our other big topic. There's about 22 congressional acts of Congress that govern U.S. aquaculture, spread amongst 15 distinct federal offices, can be multiple offices in one big agency. This is kind of our playground. This is where NAA works a lot. And an initial study that kind of kicked off a variety of studies looking at regulatory impact and costs, the researchers estimated there's over 1,300 state and federal laws that govern U.S. aquaculture. And so we're kind of a complicated country, as you may aware. We're a republic of sovereign states. We can have these overarching federal laws like the Clean Water Act or the Endangered Species Act. And especially in the case of the Clean Water Act, it's delegated to the states, and states can be more restrictive than sort of that federal foundation. So this makes for a patchwork of regulations and different state approaches. So it makes it a pretty complicated picture. But this research, which is now complete on these different segments of U.S. aquaculture and covered about 75% of the value of production out there, it's produced a series of peer-reviewed papers. And now the team is working on a summary synthesis paper, which we're really looking forward to receiving, where they're going to sort of say, this is the state of the state, but what can we do about it practically? And this team actually knows a lot more than probably I do, because they've talked to so many farmers. This was not work that occurred by receiving a paper survey in the mail or an electronic survey through email. These were on-farm interviews to delve into what these costs were. And I think the most striking finding, and this is the salmonid, so this would be Atlantic salmon, rainbow trout, coho, brook, brown, those kind of fish, the production in the U.S. If you look at that box down there in the lower left-hand corner, there is no scaling of regulations in the U.S. Everybody abides to the same level. And so if you look at that, if you're a farm, if Easton and I said, we want to start a farm and we want to try a great idea, but we don't want to jump in at 500,000 pounds or 2 million pounds. We just want to try this out. 20,000 pounds is the cutoff they selected as a small farm. The cost to us to grow fish would be about $3.31 a pound, just on regulation. That's not the input cost. That's not buying your feed and growing fish. And it doesn't take a rocket science. You've been to the grocery store. You know what fish costs. Could we do this? Heck no, we can't. So we have a country, through this regulatory burden, are really stifling innovation. And the environmental critics say, we don't want to see big factory farms in the U.S. Well, guess what? These regulations are driving that boat towards that. And it's really very, very disappointing. It's so hard to start out and beta test farming ideas when you have these kind of regulatory costs. And so what are we doing with this? We've talked to EPA, we've been to different states and talked about it, and it's rolled back some regulations. It's triggered an educational effort within EPA to start talking about, okay, so what are we really doing as an agency? Are we really achieving, well, we have achieved clean water in the US and should be proud of that. It's been a 50-year journey with the Clean Water Act, but is that next regulation the best regulation? When does that ever stop? And this is the data we now have. Rather than complaining, we're paying a lot for regulations, we now have some real facts and figures to back that up. So these are a couple issues, I think, but if you have questions, if you want more information, there's my cell phone number. We have Hawaiian members, so I get calls all kinds of times. There's my email address. It's an open door situation. Happy to chat with you, and thank you again for allowing me to join you this afternoon.
Thank you, Paul. That is some astounding, looking at the 331 a pound for a small, just as small farmers, it's a huge barrier. So I hadn't really put that together, and appreciate you sharing your perspective from NAA. As Paul said, if you have questions, let's start submitting those so we can start to aggregate them and get organized for the end here. But let's go to Drew Winters at Stronger America Through Seafood.
Hi, all. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak about the work that Stronger America Through Seafood is doing to promote a U.S. offshore aquaculture industry, and about the legislative landscape and the opportunities and challenges in Washington, and maybe the outlook for some legislation to help establish a U.S. offshore aquaculture industry. Paul's a tough act to follow. So, and Easton covered a few things I wanted to talk about, so I'll try to streamline a little bit. So next slide, please. Stronger America Through Seafood is an industry coalition of partners representing the seafood supply chain, everything from seafood companies to aquaculture farmers who are looking to get established, to restaurants, to feed companies supplying aquafeed. We've been around since about 2017, and we've been working to do two things. One is to dispel those myths around the environmental sustainability of offshore aquaculture in the media and on Capitol Hill. And we advocate for federal legislation and executive action to resolve the regulatory hurdles facing investment in offshore aquaculture in the U.S. And in particular, we've been working to pass bipartisan legislation, the Advancing the Quality and Understanding of American Aquaculture, or the AQUA Act, that would establish national standards for offshore aquaculture and clarify a regulatory system for fish farming in the U.S. EEZ. The science and the research demonstrates that aquaculture is one of the most sustainable forms of protein production, and we want to help legislators and their staff understand the tremendous advances on that front that can make sustainable, environmentally sound aquaculture a reality now here in the U.S. Next slide. So as Easton talked a little bit about, at least half of the seafood that Americans consume is farm raised, and a vast percentage of that is imported, and the demand for protein is growing, and wild capture landings are not appreciably increasing. So how will we meet this demand? The U.S. currently ranks 17th in the world in aquaculture production, yet there's no open ocean finfish aquaculture in the U.S. EEZ and only one seafood farm. It's done all over the world, and in some places, though they lack the environmental safeguards that we would demand here. We've got a long coastline and an expansive EEZ, superior technology, and ample feed sources that have really changed over the last few decades, and a growing seafood market that could put us at the top of the list to compete. But we've got overlapping federal agency jurisdiction, and we lack a predictable, affordable, and efficient permitting process for aquaculture here. And that means the U.S. stands to lose out on nearly $100 billion in global aquaculture growth over the next 10 years, and we will continue to miss the environmental and health benefits made possible through marine aquaculture. There's an incredible economic opportunity for sustainable fisheries to grow aquaculture on our own shores, creating more American jobs and more market for soy farmers. So next slide. And just to put a point on it, a U.S. offshore aquaculture industry provides a tremendous new market opportunity for soy farmers and their products here at home. Next slide, please. And so, as Paul talked about, over the past several decades, we've had these advances in science and technology, and feed innovation has really been pivotal to the improve sustainability and efficiency of aquaculture. And you all are at the heart of this innovation. And with ingredients like soy and corn, peas, wheat, and barley, as well as the oils from soybean and canola oil, and this growing plant protein like algae and seaweed adding to the mix, that really is changing the landscape for aquafeeds. And with that being one of the most expensive costs for fish farming businesses, replacing these feeds with sustainable plant protein reduces reliance on wild farm fish, but provides a more cost-effective feed option for fish farmers. So we do appreciate your work on this front. And those market opportunities for soy farmers and the changes in the feed ingredients are important stories for you to be telling on Capitol Hill. And I'll talk more about how you can get involved in this. So next slide. Now I'll turn to a little bit of the legislative overlook and talk to you about a number of bills that we see being introduced this year, this Congress, and the outlook for them and some of the challenges we face. So I'll talk to you first about the AQUA Act, which I mentioned before. Again, it's SATS's bill that we've been working to pass over the last couple of Congresses. In the Senate, it has not been reintroduced this Congress, but we're hoping that it will be reintroduced fairly quickly. And in the Senate, we anticipate that Senator Wicker and Senator Schatz will be the lead sponsors on that. And in the House, Representative Kamek from Florida and Case from Hawaii would be the lead sponsors in the House. Again, it's a bipartisan bill that upholds existing environmental standards while providing regulatory certainty and clarity for marine aquaculture development. It provides for a set of national standards, much like what you would find in the Magnuson-Stevens Act for federal fisheries management, to guide the development of offshore aquaculture, and includes a national plan to identify and establish areas that are well suited for aquaculture through aquaculture opportunity areas. This is something that NOAA is already doing through executive action, and I'll build on this a little bit later. The bill also establishes NOAA as the lead regulatory agency through the Office of Marine Aquaculture to coordinate the federal permitting process. And it establishes a clear permitting process through NOAA that offers security of tenure for to give financing, more certainty for financing. And it also funds research and extension services to support innovation and the growth of aquaculture here. And so, you know, again, it has not been reintroduced yet this Congress, but we expect it to be in the near future. Paul mentioned, you know, the regulatory environment. So the goal here is to provide a legislative framework for that regulation. The Fifth Circuit, the U.S. Federal Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled several years ago that NOAA could not regulate offshore aquaculture through the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And at that time, there was no authority for anyone to do this in federal waters. There have been a number of farmers that have been trying to establish farms for 10 years, unsuccessfully trying to navigate that permitting process to get your permit from the Corps of Engineers or to get a permit from EPA. So this doesn't do away with those permits, but it is intended to provide a stable regulatory framework. The aquaculture opportunity areas are to sort of streamline the environmental process and reduce the need for environmental impact statements to EA's environmental analysis, and providing a quicker path through those regulations. Okay, next I'm going to turn to the Seafood Act. This was a bill that was introduced at the end of last Congress. It is being promoted by the Environmental Defense Fund and their Coalition for Sustainable Aquaculture. Again, it is expected to be reintroduced in both the House and the Senate this Congress, but it hasn't been yet. Last Congress, Representative Lowenthal, who is now retired, was the lead sponsor, and he was joined by Representative Mace, Brownlee, and Panetta as co-sponsors. This bill is a little bit different than what SATS is trying to do. It is charging the Government Accountability Office to produce a report detailing permitting, monitoring, and regulatory options for governing offshore aquaculture in the U.S. It directs the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine to complete a study on the scientific basis for efficient and effective regulation of offshore aquaculture. And it would authorize NOAA to create an offshore aquaculture assessment program that would gain data from on-the-water demonstration projects, either existing or new projects, to close what they believe are significant knowledge gaps necessary to determine what are the best science-based standards for aquaculture. And it would create a grant program under NOAA for minority-serving institutions to establish aquaculture centers of excellence. I'm going to touch a little bit on where we stand on this bill, but I want to bring you next to a bill that's already been filed this Congress, and it's the Coastal Seaweed Farm Act, H.R. 1461. It was introduced by Representative Huffman, who sits on natural resources and has historically led on the Water, Oceans, and Wildlife Subcommittee. I think it has a different name this Congress now that the Republicans are in control. But notably, it's also co-sponsored by Mary Peltola, who took Don Young's place in Alaska. So they introduced this bill together last month, and it would direct NOAA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to produce a joint study evaluating the benefits and impacts of coastal seaweed farming, and devise the necessary metrics and regulations to do that. It also creates an Indigenous Seaweed Farming Fund, a grant program that would reduce the cost of barriers for Indigenous communities. Now, this is, in my opinion, a big advance because Alaska has been historically opposed to aquaculture in general, but with the idea of a mariculture bill, I think there's a real opportunity for some dialogue to take place. And if you can move to the opportunities and challenges slide. So from SAT's perspective, we're focused on establishing legislation that's going to establish the stable regulatory framework. And our goals are to continue to build support in both chambers and educate members about the economic benefits of offshore aquaculture and the value of that industry here, particularly as it relates to food security. In terms of the Seafood Act, we're really pleased that a major NGO has come to the table in support of offshore aquaculture. I think that's a huge advance. And I really do believe that we share the same goal of a well-regulated offshore aquaculture industry here. The difference is that SATS believes that we can do this here now and do it well. And the Seafood Act doesn't go quite far enough to support that goal. The timeline of the studies and the fact there's no clear regulatory pathway provided for in that bill for offshore aquaculture, I think is a challenge. But we're committed to working together, and truly passing any big piece of legislation is going to require all stakeholders around the table and moving in the same direction to get something passed. So we're looking forward to see how this unfolds and how we can work together. This Congress, we're also seeking funding for NOAA's Office of Aquaculture in the FY24 budget. Last Congress, we worked to secure an additional $1 million in appropriations for the office, and that's driven some of the research work that they're doing and the aquaculture opportunity areas. And so we've submitted an appropriations request for this Congress as well for $25 million. And NOAA's made great progress to establishing sites in California and the Gulf of Mexico, and they continue to work towards more. I think we've got the opportunity for a hearing this Congress, and we would love to see that to really advance the dialogue. There's a real opportunity to educate members of Congress. The more pieces of legislation that's out there, the more stakeholders who are at the table advocating for offshore aquaculture really gives us an opportunity to advance the needle. But we do have a big challenge, and Senator Cantwell continues to be the chair of the Commerce Committee. That's the committee of jurisdiction over these bills. And Washington State has had a lot of challenges in the areas of aquaculture, going so far as to try and ban finfish in aquaculture in state waters. There's been a lot of concern in Maine, and we've seen a lot of negative press against aquaculture and some moves to ban aquaculture in Maine state waters in different places. And there have also been protests out in California. Don't Cage Our Oceans is an organization that has been pretty vocal and does not want to see offshore aquaculture. And so SATS continues to push back against that in the media and on Capitol Hill. But that's a real challenge for us moving forward, that to passing legislation, particularly with Senator Cantwell at the helm of at the helm of the Commerce Committee. And so finally, I want to wrap up and give you some ideas on how to get involved. We talked a little bit more about it. SATS welcomes the inclusion of additional board members, additional members from the aquafeed community. We would love to have you. And if you'd like to talk about that more, please reach out to me. I'm at Drew at Stronger. My email's on the first slide, strongerthroughseafood.org. You can get in touch with me there. If you go on Hill Walks with SAA or other organizations that you're involved with, you can support the Aqua Act on the Hill. We'll pass along some sign-on letters of support this Congress. We encourage you to sign onto those in support of offshore aquaculture and the Aqua Act, and call your senators and representatives in support of offshore aquaculture. And finally, tell your story. You've got great stories to tell about the work that you're doing in terms of feed innovation and the opportunities for a new and expanding market for your project, for your products through offshore aquaculture. So we encourage you to tell that story as you go to the Hill, and get in touch with us. We can always tell more stories in SATS's newsletter and on social media, and as we spread that out in our letters to the editor and stories we're telling to the media. So welcome any questions you have, and happy to talk through those at the end of the program.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Drew. Let's just for the sake of time, move on to Virginia. We have about 15 minutes left for you, not to rush the quality message from our friends at American Soybean Association. But Virginia, you want to take things off?
Thanks, Easton, and good afternoon, everyone. That's the privilege of being last, means you get my presentation in double time. So I hope everyone's got their ears ready to listen. So I'm Virginia Houston. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the American Soybean Association. I know several of you are familiar with who ASA is, but for those of you who aren't, ASA is the National Domestic Policy Organization for U.S. soybean growers. You'll have heard Easton mention our partners in the soy family, the U.S. Soybean Export Council and the United Soybean Board, but ASA is the voice for all things domestic policy in Washington, D.C. We have 30 state affiliates across the soybean growing states, representing about 500,000 soybean farmers in the U.S. You can see a map right here of where our members are. And I see that several of our state affiliates are on the call today, so really appreciate y'all joining. We have our policy focus is three-pronged: market development, the farm economy, and movement to market. So everything ASA does in Washington, D.C. is designed around those three prongs. But why aquaculture? And, when I took over this portfolio, I would go to the Hill and hear members of Congress say, but you represent soybean farmers. Why do you care about aquaculture? That's fish. And, I'm from Kansas or Nebraska. I don't understand why I should care about this. And I'm like, au contraire, let me tell you why. ASA has invested very heavily over the past 40 years in promoting aquaculture globally. So through funds granted from USDA via the market access program and the foreign market development program, ASA has worked through our partners at USEC and the World Initiative in Soy Human Health, WISH, to promote aquaculture markets globally. Primarily in China. We've been working there since 1992. China is, as you saw on Easton's slide, the world's largest aquaculture producer. But that work in China, is particularly in aquaculture, has led to China being the largest market in the world for U.S. soybeans, for better or for worse, see 2018. So as I've mentioned, we've worked around the world for the past couple of decades to promote aquaculture, but as you've heard from Paul and from Drew, domestic aquaculture production has lagged behind, and that is a disappointment for U.S. soybean growers because, as I mentioned, we're always working to open new markets, and that includes domestic markets. And real quick before we go to questions, I'm going to give you a little overview of how ASA supports aquaculture. We're committed to opening new markets, and we see the domestic aquaculture market as a great potential for U.S. soy. If you follow the soybean industry, you'll know that there are expected a good number of new crush facilities to come online due to rising demand for soybean-based biodiesel. So we have all that oil. We're also going to have all that soybean meal, and that meal is going to need a home. And what better home than to feed it to U.S.-produced, domestically farmed fish? We are also very supportive of research on plant-based feeds that position soy as the most economically viable and environmentally friendly alternative to fish meal and fish oil, or in the case of our partners globally, homemade fish feed. I grew up in agriculture, and I'm used to smells, and sometimes homemade fish feed that smells. We have been a longtime supporter of the Aqua Act, and we're looking forward to working with SATS and NAA in this Congress to see it advance some more. Our growers will be in town for our July fly-in, and SATS Aqua will definitely be on the agenda for our Hill Day. And looking ahead, this is a Farm Bill reauthorization year. While the majority of aquaculture issues are run through the Commerce Department, through NOAA, and that's not part of the Farm Bill, there are opportunities, for collaboration and enhancement, some language for cooperation between Commerce and USDA around aquaculture, and potential opportunities in the research title for increased research into aquaculture production. And again, looking at the angle for U.S. soy as a feedstock for aqua feed. So I went real fast, but that's all I have. So Easton, I could get back to you for question and answer time.
Perfect. Thank you, Virginia. You certainly did fill your 10 minutes in 4 minutes, 39 seconds. So excellent. So we haven't got a lot of questions from the group. I do have one, just a broader theme that I saw between the Aqua Act and NAA. And I was just curious, it seems like one of the common problems is just I want to joke a little bit about how common this problem is, but just the patchwork of regulatory policies. And it seems like one of the initiatives of the Aqua Act is to establish or get additional funding for NOAA's Office of Aquaculture. Is that a potential solution for a more centralized, to that a solution to that patchwork of policies and permitting processes, or is that a separate solution? Maybe start with Drew or Paul.
Let Paul go first, I think.
I guess
So
to simplify my question is NOAA the solution to create a better standard for that patchwork problem?
So they're serving in that role right now through the executive order and assisting candidate farms, explaining to them the agencies that are out there, arranging for pre-application permit meetings and helping walk them through the necessary permits. So what's not really recognized very well is we've been growing fish in net cages in large scale for about 30 years in the United States. It's been in state waters and it's subject to these same regulations. So our perspective is a bit different. Definitely the process is complicated. It's demanding. You're growing fish in a public resource that people care a lot about, the oceans or coastal waters. And so it's not easy. It's just not easy. And it can be very demanding depending on the production system, the size and scale of it, and where it's placed. So this role that NOAA has taken on through the executive order is really a good one and would be kind of expanded in the act. I mean, it would become part of law, but it's within their current regulatory roles as it is.
Mhm.
And the issues are they're finding, just as we knew, that writing environmental impact statements is not an easy thing to do. And it takes time and effort. And this is where they've asked for additional resources to be able to complete those analyses. We also have built into the federal regulatory system, it's our laws, it's stuff we've supported as citizens, the opportunity to challenge those permits and the progress in acquiring permits or even the regulations those permits are based upon. So these early efforts, and Florida Sea Grant has funded a net pen in the Gulf of Mexico as an education demonstration farm, have really highlighted the opportunity for the public to object and question the permits that could be granted. And they're exercising that right. Our thinking is that as farms come online, and the Florida Sea Grant farm could be the first one, the public at large will start to recognize that the fears that have been expressed to them aren't real, and that we can really, as a nation, grow a lot of fish in a very small footprint offshore with extremely low environmental impact. This is common around the world. Some countries are better at it than others. We're just not a part of that rank of countries that does that.
So Easton, I just want to build a little bit on something that Paul mentioned. So NOAA's doing tremendous work. And it's my understanding that the work to establish the aquaculture opportunity areas can be a tremendous help in reducing some of the time it takes to get a permit. But that still does not take away the fact that there is no authority for any farmer to actually put a farm in U.S. federal waters. So Paul's right. Yes, we've got farming in state waters, and we have done that. And Blue Ocean Mariculture has a tremendous farm in state waters off of Hawaii that mimics offshore aquaculture. But that's the only one that mimics the same conditions as U.S. waters, right? And so it's a next step to get farms into U.S. waters, not state waters. It's a different process and it's a different kind of thing. So yes, there's lots of the same types of regulations, but without that authority under some federal statute, right? Who is the agency to provide that authority for a farm to work in federal waters? And so that is what the Aqua Act does. That's distinct from what NOAA can just do under its authority to develop these aquaculture opportunity areas. SATS continues to believe that it is necessary. That is a major hurdle to getting farms in the water. Yes, the regulatory process does take a long time, Yes, it can be streamlined potentially through the use of these AOAs, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be really important to have that regulatory authority. And the goal is to help farmers get through that process more efficiently. No, it doesn't take away the fact that people will use the court system to challenge these permits, and that is a right as American citizens. But I think with the work that is being done to evaluate that and evaluate those sites for the best environmental sustainability, I think it provides some more certainty and some safeguards, environmental safeguards, at least from an outside perspective, that these are going to be, acceptable sites for farms to be established in ocean conditions in U.S. waters.
Very good. Thank you. I'm not sure how to answer this question, but I'll present it maybe, and Virginia can help me. It's from Krishna. How would SAA address the issue of use of terrestrial land for soy production when there is already less land available for crops and sustainable food supply for humans? I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that, to be really candid. Terrestrial land for soy production. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, Krishna, so I'll have to get back to you. I would say that soybean farmers are, if I want to compete with anyone, I think I want to compete with corn maybe, but we're trying to make the most use of the land that we have, not convert land. It's one of the arguably one of the benefits of U.S. soy in that it's so highly productive and sustainable. So I'm not trying. Yeah, I'm going to pause there and just say I'm not really qualified to answer it right now, but I will research that and try to get a better answer for you. We have a few other prompts here. Let's see. Do you think this one would be for Paul? Do you think that NAS underreporting affects the understanding of the true value of soy-based feed in aquaculture? And I would say aquaculture overall. And I think the simple answer to that is absolutely underreporting is an issue. And I know you and I have had a few conversations about how to generate data that's both accurate and that empowers farmers. But you want to comment on the underreporting any further?
So it doesn't really affect the value of soy because there's market clearance indicators that you guys follow all the time. And what Easton's talking to, we've been trying to figure out a way to have use some of the big data that's out there to better estimate U.S. production in aquaculture through the use of feeds. And that to us makes a lot of sense, where we're not getting so much into price per pound and this sort of thing that a lot of people are demanding. They want to see public reporting of prices, and the farmers are extremely reluctant now to go there. So that's a project we're working on. I would say Easton's got this interest. We have this interest. We want to cooperate in that regard. I don't know if you're thinking about futures markets and how the consumption might be projected, but I just don't think that's affected, because currently all the numbers we have are provided to the census of aquaculture, which is every 5 years. So we're looking now at 5-year-old data, right? That's not really going to change through the census. And in fact, if we had more real-time data that Easton's talking about, or not real-time, but pretty darn close to it, much better, it actually might help your value projections.
Thanks, Paul.
Does that make sense, Easton?
Yep, yeah, it does. And to those listening, we're talking a lot of hypotheticals, but Paul and I have discussed a number of opportunities to improve that market data and really make sure that it's owned by farmers and used to the benefit of aquaculture farmers. We have a couple of last questions. I'm going to breeze through them really quickly and get us out of here only a minute or so after our scheduled time. But there's a question on the research being done at the University of Idaho. That's actually going to be discussed at the June webinar. So if you're interested in the research there and all the other SAA research, please plan to join us on June 28th. And I'll do one more just to kind of round us out here from John. What's the role of SAA in national development and solving the constraints mentioned going forward? So we are certainly supportive of a lot of these issues, and finding solutions to all of these issues. And I appreciate you asking that question. As you can see, there's no single silver bullet to that. And so our role primarily right now is in demonstrating the value of soy and solving the nutritional challenges. Given and how we are funded by farmers, we're not able to, in many cases, pay for the policy and the regulatory solutions that need to happen. So it's why we empower and try to create resources for Paul, for SATs, and support them as best we can. There's some caveats to that, but that's the simple. So it's not necessarily on the policy front or on the lobbying front, it's on the education and value creation. And then there's among that soy family, there's a lot of investment going into technology. So some of the technology, for example, that is used for aquaculture production around the world has been sponsored and funded by the soybean industry. The challenge is we're not embracing that. We don't have the economic opportunities to embrace that here domestically. So that's what we're committed to helping where we can and bringing some of those technologies and some of that opportunity home. But it takes a number of complex solutions, and that's the entire purpose of our organization. So not an easy answer, a long-winded answer, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and that's exactly why we have these kinds of conversations. So with that, I will. Let's announce our hat winner really quick, and we'll get us out of here. So I think what I will do is just roll through here, and we'll give it to, there we go. Our marketing team randomly selected John Corbin. So John, if you don't mind sending me your address, we will get you your wonderful SAA hat and socks. If you want, I can autograph it for you. But appreciate all of you joining us today. And again, hope you join us again on June 28th, where we'll be talking research. And if you have any other questions or want to connect, I know everyone on this panel has made themselves accessible. Be happy to hear your perspective. If there's ideas or challenges that we didn't get to dive into today, we certainly want to address those. So my information is on the QR code if you want to scan that, and I'd be happy to connect you with anyone else on the panel. So thank you very much for joining us, for supporting SAA, and we will see you all again soon.